Better than check one, two. It's very straight and to the point. So if you wanted to have multiple line comments, this is how you would do it. Here you can see that you don't need those two lines there. I would say use this for at the top of your application. If you were to come over to something like this, I would use a, if it lets me click, I would use a multiple line comment at the top of mine, at the top of my app, where I would say this app is intended to do X, Y, Z. You can find some functionality for the blah, blah, blah over here. You know, like this is where you would, that's what I would use a multiple line comment for because it's just so much easier to use the shortcut to comment things out that it's pretty rare you'll take the time to actually type out a multiple line comment. But that's what they look like, that's what they're for. So most of the time you'll use this style because of the shortcut that we talked about yesterday. Blah, 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 blah. So that's comments. So we have two forward slashes, or we have a forward slash asterisk, asterisk, forward slash to differentiate between multiple line comments and single line comments. Booleans, true and false. Seattle is definitely not cheap. Numbers, we have integers, which are whole rounded numbers. Those would be considered integers. Floating point numbers are where the decimal place shows up. So that would be the differentiation. If I'm not mistaken, integers have to have no decimal place. If somebody can correct me on that. I'm pretty sure in order for it to be an integer, it has to be whole. But I could be wrong. I might be, am I wrong? Yeah, okay. So don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the differentiation. So then we have floats down here, which do have decimal place values. Number is an integer for, oh, there you go. Yeah, so in order to be an integer, it does need to be a whole number. But you also have access to this, just like we were talking about with math and console, we have this number object as well. So if we wanted to, come on over, we type in number JavaScript. And we wait for the web. While we're doing that, we can go back real quick. So we can use this object and pull those functions off of it and pass in the data that we wanted to evaluate in order to get a very quick answer instead of having to write all of this code ourselves. Because if we wanted to, we would have to write essentially a loop that checks to make sure that the integer inserted into the function is indeed an integer and not, you know, a floating point, and that would take way longer to write than obviously just doing this in one line, right? So come back up here, we see we have number. The function converts the object argument to a number that represents the object's value. If the value cannot be converted to a legal number, not a number is returned. So it operates based off numbers, and it receives an object. It returns a number, da, 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 da. I think this is the function. I do not believe that this is what we're looking for. This is what we're looking for, JavaScript number. There we go. So here is where we'll be able to find all of these methods, and I bet you if we scroll down, we can find is safe integer, which you guys don't need to worry about, and is integer. Safe integer is essentially a lower level language thing where there's a differentiation between the numerical data types, as I was discussing earlier, or sorry, yesterday. In C, or in Java, there's bytes, there's doubles, there's floats, there's integers, like there's a lot of different numerical types, and one of the types is a unsigned integer. This is in C, and the reason we're talking about C is because JavaScript compiles to C. In C, there's unsigned integers and there's signed integers. So unsigned integers can only go from 0 to whatever value they're allotted, whereas safe signed integers can go from the negative value to the equivalent positive value. So this you really don't need to worry about. I'm sure that this is something that has to do with when JavaScript was like first created and they were implementing more of those C functionalities into it. If you want, you can check if something is an integer, but you probably don't need to worry about checking if it's a safe integer, probably ever. I think that by this time technology's caught up and we don't really need to worry about that anymore. But that's how you would be able to look up where this method is, how it's being used. We have another method coming off of it. Is 100 infinite? It's not. We have this keyword infinity that we can use. So obviously it just represents a infinite loop that will continue forever. Infinity is not finite. There you go. Number, number, number. Went over strings, right? Here's some more string methods. If you wanted to look these up, you could do the same thing I did up here. So we have math, we have globals, array, and then, what was the one I was looking for? String. So if we wanted to look up the string methods that they are using, let's see. Starts with, ends with, includes, index of, two uppercase, okay. Index of, ends with, two local uppercase, and then it tells you right here exactly what it does. It just takes your string and makes everything lowercase. And it doesn't error out on numbers. It doesn't try to do it on numbers, so you don't need to worry about like putting a number in there and like messing everything up. It'll still work with a number. So yeah, some more string methods, undefined. See, so right here, var x is undefined because essentially you've created this spot in memory, but you've never actually did anything with it. So garbage collection will essentially, as the code runs, it will erase that spot in memory because it's not being necessarily manipulated in any way. If the compiler runs into something like this, you will get undefined because you're not actually, like, as far as the computer is concerned, this doesn't exist. So that's why this is undefined. If he said var x equals null, then it would be null, and you could console log it and you can work with it and you can use it. The reason that they're saying that this is undefined in particular because they're talking about just like literally these two lines. There's nothing the computer can necessarily do with this, and so it just essentially ignores it, erases it, and the value stored at x is undefined. Now it is defined because we are associating that value there. Same thing with if we put null, like I said, that would be a value of null rather than undefined. And null is just represents the intentional absence of any value. Unlike undefined, it's not explicitly set by default to unsigned variables. If you want something to be null, you must make it so. So that's useful because typically you'll never get an error back as null, and if you do, then that's a real big telltale sign that there's probably something that you wrote concerning a null data type that's going wrong. More often than not, the errors you'll see will be, more often than not, the errors you see will be undefined. You'll try to manipulate some data, you'll return it, you'll plug it into another function, and then you'll console log it, and then it'll error out and it'll say, whatever you just tried to console log is undefined. That's probably 90% of the errors you're going to be seeing. We have a video here. I'll let you guys just go ahead and watch that. I'm not going to play the video and have us all sit here and watch it, but I'm sure it dives a little bit deeper into what I'm talking about here. But I'm sure we get the point. Strings, variable declaration, all that. So does anybody want to shout out the answer for this one? A, B, C, or D?
I want to say C.
C? Any rebuttals to that? Okay. Hey, look closely. Those double quotation marks are not the same. These kind of quotations are called curly quotes. It can be a programmer's worst nightmare. Often you'll come across these quotes when you are copying and pasting some text from the internet. So to go into exactly what they're talking about, there's UTF-8 encoding that goes into essentially all computer communication these days. You may have heard of it. It's capital UTF-8. It's essentially the standard upon which characters and letters are transmitted on the internet. And so the way that translates to the computer is up here, I'll do it with my cursor since I'm recording. Up here, this is fine because this is the typical quotations that we're used to that we can plug in with our keyboard. But these quotes are a special UTF-8 different character that the computer does not recognize as a double quote. So that's why this is kind of confusing, but these aren't actually the same thing. The person didn't actually put that with their keyboard. They had to go to a Unicode table and they had to look through this list and find, I wonder if this will work, quotation. See, so now you can see all of a sudden there's all these different quotation marks that the computer translates differently depending on which one it is. These all have different codes associated with them. I'll pump it up a little bit. So you can see a right single quotation mark has a UTF code of U plus, is that the UTF code? Let's figure that out. There's two codes there. I don't want to mislead you guys. Yeah, so it's U plus 2019, right? But if we go back, whoops, what did I do? Anyway, I think you guys get the point. See, so now we have a different code that the computer interprets differently. So that's what's going on with this problem is this isn't the same UTF code character that JavaScript expects to be like the string declaration. So that's why that's the correct answer. And I actually didn't catch that. I thought it was none of the above. So I'm glad you guys said that because I would have clicked this one and been like, oh, that's the wrong answer. But yeah, that's why. All right, which of the following is not a number? That is, when using type of on the various values below, which will not return a responsive number? Right here? First one? First one? Okay. Hey! Nice. This one was tricky for me personally. I couldn't remember if NaN was considered a number because it literally stands for not a number. But in computer memory, I guess it is still considered a data type of a number because it was intended to be a number. You'll see this when you try to do some mathematical operation and it returns a string. So like before when we were showing coercion, which we'll get into, you remember like I was able to take 42 and add it to like apple or something like that. That's when you would get an NaN error in the console is you accidentally concatenated with a string instead of doing a mathematical operation. So that's what NaN is and that's what it's for. And that's probably why it's still considered a numerical data type because it's intended to be a number. Cool. All right, choose the correct statement. Null represents a value that is yet to be defined and undefined represents a value that is intentionally absent. Undefined represents a value that is yet to be defined, and null represents a value that is intentionally absent. Undefined and null are equivalent and can be used interchangeably, or none of the above are correct. B? I agree. Nice, yes. So undefined represents a value that is yet to be defined, and null represents a value that is intentionally left absent. So, yeah. We won't go over that again. I think we have a good grasp on undefined and null. What will the final value of cup be? The tricky one. I like this. Anyone know? Remember, the computer reads left to right, top down. So it reads this first, this second, this third, this fourth. What'd you say? Correct. Because none of this matters up here. I kind of showcased this yesterday, but yesterday was a fire hose day. But the computer interprets this correctly. This is correct. This is also correct. Like, these are all valid lines of code. But at the end of the lines of code, what your end result is whatever the last line is, right? That's what, like the end result of a story is the ending of the story, right? So if you think of this as like a story, we're saying we start off with a cup of coffee, but now we have a cup of water. But then we bring in this mug, and the mug is of T, and then finally we're saying, okay, cup is equal to mug. So whatever mug is, cup is now equal to that as well. It doesn't matter that it used to be of coffee, of water, all that jazz. What does matter is this line right here. And as a matter of fact, you don't even need this. You can just look right here, and where it says, what is the final value of cup? You could be like, well, they reassigned cup right here, so I can interpret right above this line right here is probably what the value is. So that's how you would like go about like thinking through that problem. Ooh. All right, create two variables that will contain information you don't yet have. Okay, I'm lazy. I didn't do this. I typed it out, promise. On to the next one. Let's just go back. Create two variables with information that we don't yet have. You'll see this a lot in the documentation, well, not documentation, but like in Learn. And I said this yesterday, semicolons don't matter. When you're declaring a variable in JavaScript, they are literally practically ignored. They are not entirely ignored. If I put too many, that would error out, but essentially they're not necessarily needed. Oh, still said it was correct. So this could be, again, like going back to the REPL thing, this could just be this thing just seeing var and being like, cool. Pretty sure, never do this. Just don't do that. If you feel the need to put a semicolon, put one, but you don't need it in JavaScript. So we just declared two variables that are empty. Later, we could come in, we can say, you know, this is equal to 40, or we could say that this is equal to string. But as of right now, they're essentially empty sockets that are undefined, right? We're just saying we want to have this space in memory, but we haven't done anything with it yet. Create two variables that you already know will be null and assign them the special keyword null. So pretty simple, right? Once again, why make it harder on yourself? Come in. I'm hitting command, but you can hit control. So if you notice, my cursor will just flop back and forth. I'm pretty sure on Windows that's control, and on Mac it's command. So if you want to like quickly traverse any text document, like if this was like hundreds of lines long and I just wanted to get to the bottom, you could just hit control/command down and it would take you all the way down to the bottom. Same thing with like left and right lines. If you had a line that was like, you know, thousands of characters long for some reason, you could hit control and hit and go all the way to the end. So it's a nice little shortcut just to like get to where you want to be in a quicker fashion, especially using a touchpad. I'm used to using a mouse. And so, what is this operator called? Anybody remember? I know it. It describes what it does, essentially. Close. The compiler is what actually reads the code and translates it to machine code. It's a what? It's an assignment operator. You're close, yeah. Flip them around in your brain, you're so close. So, again, every single one of these symbols is essentially considered an operator. They are operating and fulfilling specific roles. They are operating on the data. They are changing the data. So that's why we consider these different symbols operators. And unfortunately, you'll have to like kind of remove part of what you learned in like elementary math as this being like equals to, because it is equals to, but it's an assignment operator in the sense that like we're not doing any mathematical operation here, obviously. Like, yeah, exactly, yeah. And then whatever you label it, wherever you call it later on in your program, you'll just access that data with that name. So here, we'll do null, but if I wanted access to null, as a matter of fact, I'll show you a quick conditional real quick. So if I had something like if ugly kittens double equals comparison operator, not the same as the assignment operator. This is the comparison operator. This is the comparison data type operator. I don't think that's what it's called, but that's how I remember it. So this one compares values, value comparison operator. This one compares values and data type. So if ugly kittens is directly equal to null, boring puppies equals not possible. They're great. So you can see this is how you would use like null. Essentially, like typically you would try to have some information in here, and this would be like an error check. So you could have something like an array of kittens, and down here it would be if ugly kittens comes back as null, command delete, command backspace, take the line, command backspace, just like with commenting. If ugly kittens is null, console.log, there is an error, right? So this is how you can conceptualize like variables and how we will use them later and how to check what's going on. This is a very simple and basic example, but imagine this is an array of kitten names, and imagine that this is like some variable that we're just trying to, change depending on a conditional, a Boolean. So we're doing a comparison operator here. We're saying if ugly kittens ends up being null, which it's not, then console log there's an error. That's how you would like error check and make sure that you're getting the data back that you expect and that the data types are correct and everything like that. So we'll get into comparisons in just a second here, but just a quick brief look into it. This is essentially what you would use a comparison operator for if you were anticipating like different data in different places. Cool.
Is a lot of this just setting conditions for road mapping, right? You're making decisions based on, so I'm on this array, I'm on this null, because I'm maybe you're trying to force users to go somewhere or influence the behavior of the website. I'm just
yeah, it's so there's this thing called test-driven development, which is like a developing paradigm that's really prevalent in today's day and age. And essentially it's where you download some other sort of like library or technology and you write code. You can there's a lot of JavaScript testing libraries, so you can write these functions that are specifically meant to do stuff like that. So that's typically what you would see more in like the professional setting, or like if you were working for a big company, you would have developers working on the tests. You'll probably start to hear that more often. So you have like the test-driven developers, and then you have the actual people working on the features, and then you have developers working on like legacy code. So you're probably not going to just be like stuck in one place as a developer, especially on a big team. You're probably going to have like a specific role. So as far as like the workflow, it really depends on the company you're looking at, because I know that I mentioned this yesterday. I'm learning C# with Unity. I'm the only one making the game, so I don't really feel the need to necessarily write tests for my C#. So I do things like if game object equals null, return to exit the program because there's been something wrong. Like I'll do error checking like that because I'm the only one. So I'm like the CEO, and like I do what I want with my game. But if you're in a big company and they're using TDD, then they would probably have you adopt those test-driven development paradigms where they're doing similar stuff to that in a much more verbose way, where they're checking like, so if you have an application, this is kind of a tangent, but if you have an application and you want it to have a checkout feature, you would have the developers working on the feature branch to get that up and running, right? And you would have the testers checking the data that they have, and they would be like, okay, so this is an array, this needs to have user IDs, this data type should be integers, and they'll write a function that before your code actually executes and the end user sees it, it runs through the tests, and the tests will be like, okay, this is still an array, these users are still integers, like everything is looking good, now you can deploy it, now you can push it to the live branch. Again, it would really depend on like where you're at in the company as far as if you need to be worried about that or not. But test-driven development is definitely emerging and becoming more popular. So recommend it if you want to look into that, but it's not necessarily what we teach in this course. Good question. So we talked about this. Math, it's the same. Modulo returns the remainder, not the evaluation of division. This one is a tricky one. It's kind of hard to remember because none of us are used to seeing that operator in mathematical world, math world. So just remember, dividing gives you the actual evaluation of the division. This still divides, but it gives you what was left over that could not fit into the number on the left. If you get really confused, there's a link right here that goes into exactly how it works if you wanted to get like super technical, but I think that right here, this example is pretty cut and dry. So yeah.
If that example was 6 modulo 2, it would result 0.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. You got it. There you go. Yeah. So it's, again, like you'll see this more often used in checking if numbers are even or odd. That's where I've seen it used the most. I'm trying to think of where I might have seen it elsewhere, but that's like 90% of the use I've seen. If I've seen it in a different context, I don't remember it. So that's probably what you would be doing, especially if you're doing like really complicated stuff. Like if you take math pi and you store that in a variable, and then you want to square root pi, then like using modulo on that, maybe would help you instead of having to do the division and stuff like that. That's probably where you would use modulo if you were just like, what the heck is going on? But yeah, I forget the question. Yeah, 6 would end up being 0. Math global object, we discussed that. It's one of those, it's the cheese on the cheeseburger. It's there whether you like it or not. PEMDAS, anybody remember? Yep. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So in case you forget, you can always look up PEMDAS, obviously, but the reason that they're teaching you this is because, as I said yesterday, JavaScript arithmetic abides by the PEMDAS rule, like the typical mathematical rules like FOIL and stuff like that that we've come to, expect to work. So they're not going to like redesign the wheel. We use PEMDAS in JavaScript arithmetic. So really nice for mathematicians who want to use JavaScript because they don't need to rethink their whole life. And we kind of answered this question earlier. 0. Ba-boom! Okay. Which of the following will generate a random range of numbers that is inclusive of only the following? 2, 4, 6, and 8. Boy, this would be a moment where I would copy and paste these and check what they return.
I don't understand what it's asking. Which of the following will generate a random range of numbers that is inclusive of only the following?
Can I copy?
C.
Let's try that one. 4. You said number 4? C? I mean, I should probably just try it, right? Yeah.
I don't know what math.cell is.
So floor rounds up, seal. Wait, other way around. Floor rounds down to the floor, and seal is rounds up to the ceiling. That's how you can remember that. So if you have 1.99999 like repeating, and you use math.floor, it will go down to 1. It doesn't like. I think there's math.round, which would do the typical rounding. But if you wanted to strictly make sure it always rounds down, then you would use seal, or if you wanted the other way, you would do floor, or yeah, whatever.
So take off floor, put it seal.
Wait a minute. Oh, so it's giving us remainders, so that's not what we want. What was the one I used before? Oh, hey, that's what I showed you guys yesterday. I remembered. Oh. All right. So I don't think this is the one because it gives a remainder. I think it's probably, let's see, math.seal. Math.seal. I think it's the second one. Yeah. And that's a good way to check if you didn't just want to spam all the answers. There we go. So, yeah. At first, I didn't understand it either, but then once I started running it, I got what they meant. So the reason I knew that that one was wrong is because it was giving a remainder. Just simple, process of elimination. And you always have the console available to you. Keyboard shortcuts are different depending on the browser, depending on the OS. So the easiest way for everyone to see that is to just right-click on any page and hit Inspect Element. So you go to Inspect Element, you see the DOM. We discussed this yesterday, right? All the HTML that we haven't gotten to yet. But over here in the console, you have access to a JavaScript console that will run JavaScript. So be mindful that the moment you hit enter, it'll run the command. So just like in Slack, if you hold Shift Enter, that will actually go to the next line. But if you hit enter, it'll just run whatever you have at that given moment. If you mess up and you accidentally type in an error and you were like one thing off, then you can be like, oh, I didn't mean to type that in. If you hit up on the arrow, you see I get the history of what I've typed in as I keep hitting up on the arrow. So if you accidentally mess up and you're like, oh, I didn't mean to hit enter, no, you could just hit up on the arrow and go back and be like, okay, now I can fix it. So pro tip for you guys, there is always a JavaScript console available to you here. Yeah, so the easiest way, because there's different keyboard shortcuts, sometimes it'll show you next to it. Typically it's inspect element, inspect page. It's usually inspect something because it's called the inspector. So it's, yeah. I think on mine it's Command-Shift-C. Control, yeah, it's different on every one. There we go. So for me, it's Command-Alt-C, but it might not be the same for you guys. Yeah, yeah. I think right-clicking is probably. I end up doing that more often than not because I keep switching between OSs and it's I can't remember. So.
Real quick question. So I'm doing Chrome. I did the inspect the console, and I just did var John equals my age. When I start writing John, and with autocomplete on, it returns my age down below. Is that something to look out for autocomplete?
No, that's just a feature of the compiler that JavaScript uses, which is a JIT compiler, which stands for just in time. So essentially, it's just showing you what it expects the value to be. If you put like a function on how to calculate pi to the last decimal place, it wouldn't show you that because it takes way too much time to compute that. And so you wouldn't see that autocomplete, but since like you put such a simple amount of data in there, like if I put in var 2 plus 2 equal, like they would be like, that's obviously 4. But, if it was a much more complicated verbose function, then you probably wouldn't get the autocomplete. You'd get autocomplete for like variables. Like if I had a very specific name that was like XYZ school, if I typed in XY, like that would probably be the first thing that would come up in the function, but you wouldn't see that like interpreted output on the bottom before you actually ran that function, which would probably time out. I don't think anybody's actually figured out the last decimal place of pi. So if you want some extra homework, there you go.
No, we don't have to worry about jacking up this website or anything with messing with JavaScript on here.
No, because it's all client side. So when this page loads, this is all on my end. So if I come in here and I refresh this page, the server no longer is communicating with my computer unless I explicitly like click on something. So right now I'm in an isolated instance. Now I just said, hey server, I need this route, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna send you that route. But now that I'm here, I could come in and I could up here. This little arrow, it probably looks different if you're using Chrome. It might be like the circle. Oh, it is?
Yep.
For some browsers, it might be like a circle with kind of like a crosshair around it. Click on that, and that allows you to go over every HTML element on the page. And then when you click it, it shows you exactly where it is in the DOM. But the reason I'm showing you guys this is, I kind of did this yesterday, but let's see. Why do I keep getting the color? So let's see, background color, purple. So this is client side. I'm not talking to the server. I didn't tell the server, hey, change this to, you see what I'm saying? So
As soon as you back out of this, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of that RAM.
Exactly. So right now on my computer is interpreting this information as I need to display this specific document as purple. The moment I send that request to the server again, it's going to send the same information back to me, not including the changes that I made locally, because those are volatile changes, they're not safe changes, and it's not recognized by the server. So now when I refresh, it'll be back to normal because that's what the server has on their side. Yeah. Comparison operator. Are we doing good? Do we feel like we need a break? Yeah. Let me pause this video and we can take a break.
Is there a coffee machine over here?
There's one upstairs.
No, I don't. Where's the restroom here?
This is nothing. What the heck?